U.S. President Donald Trump has pulled back troops from northern Syria ahead of a Turkish assault. Joining me now to discuss this and other big matters from around the globe is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Pentagon officials say they were blindsided by this move, Lisa.
It goes against a lot of what we have traditionally had in terms of our policy with Syria, in terms of what we've wanted in Syria. Look, it's never been clear cut what the U.S.'s bottom line has been in Syria. There's so many layers to that conflict. It's an internal conflict. It's a civil war. You have ISIS. You have the Kurds. You have insurgencies. You have Iran and Russia both on the ground and supporting Bashar al-Assad. So it wasn't an easy situation to begin with. But the one thing, or I should say two things, that we were always clear about was obviously our war on ISIS, and secondly, our support of the Kurds, who were the only militiamen, we can call them, who were on the ground. They knew the terrain. We knew their loyalty was with a free world. It was with the West. The only thing the Kurds ever wanted was to fight and help defend radicalism, and to have their own, state, and, something that they deserve, and something that the U.S., Israel, our allies have always supported for the Kurds. So to now turn our backs on the Kurds, we know exactly why Turkey would ever want to get involved in Syria. The only reason they'd want to get involved is to further their own agenda, and that's to diminish the Kurds. So everyone's blindsided by this. We don't know where this is coming from. A lot of the tweets that Donald Trump has put out since this decision was announced is in defense that we've eliminated ISIS, so now there's no longer a need to be involved in a war. That's fine, but we've also created boundaries and buffers within Syria to protect those who protected us. So it's in poor taste to turn our backs on the Kurds. I've always believed that, and I think, I would love to hear more from the president, and, not just these 140 characters on Twitter with regards to this very crucial foreign policy decision.
North Korea walked out of nuclear talks, and to no one's surprise, they blamed the United States. North Korea labels the unsuccessful nuclear talks with the U.S. as sickening.
Yeah. How, Donald Trump's foreign policy is falling apart within the last 12 hours. This is not good, right? So you look at this, situation with North Korea, just like we look at his issues with China or with Iran or, with Syria, and think, if he gets this will be the crown jewel of his foreign policy. It'll help propel him for the 2020 election, et cetera. North Korea is not giving him an easy time with this. The first meeting looked like a slam dunk. It was historic. Everyone talked about it. There was that, photo op moment of the handshake between the two. Since then, he's been playing hot and cold. Both sides, I should say, have been playing hot and cold. Donald Trump speaking very highly of Kim Jong-un at times, and then other times not backing down and saying that they need to make the concessions and not the United States. So now the North Koreans, they're calling the U.S.'s bluff, or that's what they seem to be saying that they're doing, that the U.S. doesn't have a plan, and that they are being very inflexible, was the word that their envoy used to describe the situation and to defend or justify the reason why the North Koreans would pull out of the talks at this moment. But again, this is something that Donald Trump wants. He's not going to back down, and he's not going to give in. So, maybe that's a positive thing, but we'll have to see if the North Koreans buy into that, or if they back down, or what happens if they do come back to the negotiating table.
Lisa, a second Ukraine whistleblower apparently has firsthand knowledge of Trump's allegations. The whistleblower is known as an intelligence official. Why don't you share with our viewers what those allegations are?
This is a very interesting story, right? So the one thing that this turns out, the allegations, let's back up and answer your first question. The allegations are that President Trump obviously was involved in communication with the president of Ukraine. The president of Ukraine, Hal, you and I have spoken about the elections that they recently had there. This guy is a comedian, very cool young guy, new to the political world, and of course new to office. And in these conversations, Donald Trump casually mentioned Joe Biden, and how his son was involved in illicit business dealings and such in Ukraine, that could make things a little bit sticky for Biden himself. And obviously, this obviously shows us that Donald Trump sees Biden as the most qualified candidate in the Democrat Party for 2020. But he wanted some dirt on Biden and his family. And since we saw reports and transcripts of these talks, and we saw that, there's not much to implicate Trump in that. There wasn't a tit for tat. There was never a time where Trump basically came right out and said, we're not going to give you aid if you don't give us dirt on Biden, but it was more of a casual, hey, what do you got? As like two buddies. But regardless, it's not seen as presidential. It's not seen as something that obviously the opposition thinks this is grounds for impeachment. And since we've had this ruckus going on in Washington, now there seems to be a second whistleblower who is represented by this same attorney. And what makes sense or doesn't make sense, I should say, is that this guy has the same amount of knowledge and he has the same amount of access to the call. So it's almost like, two of the same story. And if the first story wasn't compelling enough, now we have a second individual coming forward with the same story, and meaning having the same access. It doesn't give us any more information. It doesn't give us any more proximity or any more transparency to the situation. That's where we're at. But obviously, this is not a flattering situation for Americans. And especially, again, as we're coming up on this election, it's not flattering for Donald Trump. It's not flattering for the U.S. in general. The fact that the opposition wants to impeach him, and they're so fixated on impeachment rather than running their own election and winning this election, on their own grounds. That's where we're at.
Turkish President Erdogan has accepted a Trump invite to the White House. Lisa, what can we really expect to see come out of this meeting?
When it was first announced, I thought, why are we even inviting him to the White House? He's a frenemy of the United States. Turkey has been a frenemy of the United States for the last more than decade, I would say. They get their, perks, meaning the financial aid and the being in NATO, being, involved in kind of like the Western part of the Middle East, where they can, count on us and be a part of these, acronymed organizations. But at the same time, they've been double dipping. They've been siding with the Iranians. They've been siding with the Russians. They've been playing, both sides in Syria, as we now see that they're getting into, Kurdistan, I should say, into the Kurdish part of Syria. They've never been true friends. And as we know, Erdogan turned that country from a more modern country into a much more Islamist and pro-radical country in the last few years. So can we count on them? Not really. So why are we inviting them to the White House? And since the news broke late last night about us getting into Syria, rather, Turkey getting into Syria, I think it's even more suspect as to why we would want him to come. It's not in good taste to have basically the group that was working against us in the part of the world where we were interested in paying that financial aid now being invited to the White House. So I think they'll talk about Syria, of course. They'll talk about safety zones, which they love to talk about, because this is where the different groups involved in Syria can say that they've come to some sort of consensus regarding the future of Syria, but bogus, because those insurgencies are going to pop up because there's vulnerabilities and there are way too many sharks in that sea. So we'll see what happens.
U.S. researchers are on the front line of battle against Chinese theft, Lisa. And these alleged thefts include trade secrets, pirated software, and counterfeit goods up to $600 billion annually, losses by the U.S., according to a recent report by the FBI.
Yes. So, we talk about this often. Most people look at the situation with China and look at the stock market. They look at, the fact that there's been, the tariffs have put, an excessive weight on the cost of goods coming in from China, and of course, goods coming into China from the U.S. So both sides are suffering tremendously. The importers and exporters are suffering tremendously. But at the same time, we've neglected to talk more about, in terms of the true story, the transparency here, is that the main issue that the U.S. has with China is that they don't play fairly, whether it is with the tariffs or mainly with the intellectual property or the rights to goods. So what they do is they do a lot of this copycat technology. They will steal our products, they'll steal our technology, they steal software, they are using hacking methods, they're using all sorts of very just illegal ways of stealing our technology and moving forward with it. They're ruthless. That's the bottom line. And they will do anything to get ahead. And they have. And that's why Donald Trump, who was then a candidate, even ran on this. We don't want them to continue taking advantage of the United States. And intellectual property is a main tenet of that. So I think we're really clamping down on that. And it's a wonderful thing, a wonderful place to start.
Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu said he's pushing major missile defense program to counter Iran. Tell me more about that.
Right. So when Iran disappears from the headlines and we say, well, Rouhani and Zarif came to the UN General Assembly last week, and well, here in the United States, we kind of lost sight of what the General Assembly, even what happened this year because of our whole whistleblower situation and the impeachment announcement and all that. But we kind of forget about what happened with Iran. It was a missed opportunity. The French wanted the US and the Iranians to meet. They didn't. Okay, missed opportunity. We go back to life as usual. But for Bibi Netanyahu, the missiles are still pointed towards Tel Aviv and towards Jerusalem, and he has to, really focus on that enemy. So Iran, the regime in Iran, I should say, has been fixated on Israel for years and years. For 40 years, they've been in power, and for 40 years, they funded groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza and in Syria, and the list goes on and on. And we know all the money that the Iranian regime puts into terrorism, whether it's in Yemen or Lebanon or Iraq, or the list goes on and on and on. So, Bibi has his own plans. He can't wait for the U.S. to make up its mind regarding talks regarding whether or not there will be another nuclear deal between the West and Iran, or whether or not this will just fall by the wayside until a new president or Donald Trump gets reelected.
France is probing security agency threats after a police killer with high-level clearance was revealed as an Islamic radical.
Yes, so this happens to be the latest trend, Hal. Don't you see it? Here in the United States, we see that we have the whistleblowers are high-level intelligence officials who are pushing a different agenda. And there you go in France. The guy has high clearance. That's the way to infiltrate. You get in, you have all the secrets, you know what to do, and then you turn on them. This is nothing new, but it's mind-blowing for those around these individuals that they're playing, obviously double roles. The guy had high clearance, and this was a mystery for a long time. He was a cop killer with obviously a jihadi background. Imagine somebody with that type of ideology having access to government information, having high clearance, being able to access different areas, different types of information. And this is something that we have to watch out for. If we know that this is what they're doing, this is where we have to look.
In Hong Kong, the Chinese military is warning Hong Kong protesters amid clashes as tens of thousands defy the face mask ban.
Yes, the protests there are getting worse and worse, and the protesters are getting more and more courageous, I should say. It's actually interesting to watch. I think this is a very classical form of a grassroots movement that is just picking up more and more steam, and it's a beautiful thing in some ways to see people in Hong Kong who are generally very passive and have been told what to do and what to say and how to act and how to think for so many years, now coming to the streets, not backing down, and defying the authorities, which is, again, in that culture, that's not what's done. You don't defy the authorities. They don't have the level of crime or the opposition that we have, in the West, or free thought, even for that matter. So, this is interesting. When you have this face mask ban, you have curfews in certain areas, you have areas where the police don't want people to enter into, and they do anyway. So it's wonderful to watch. Let's see if the people get anywhere or are able to push through their agenda in any capacity. It'll be a beautiful thing.
Police in Pakistan blocked a march recently by thousands of protesters in Kashmir. Lisa, what are they protesting?
Oh, this Kashmir situation, we haven't been following it as much as we should. We heard about this a long time ago with India and Pakistan fighting over Kashmir. This is an old battle that has yet to be settled. And every few years or so, there is this flame up where they want to settle it their own way. And the people of Kashmir are those who suffer. They don't want to be under Indian rule. They don't want to be under Pakistani rule. But both sides want to claim this area and to claim it for good. Unfortunately, people don't pay attention to these parts of the world, and they protest on their own. And many times these protests just fizzle out. There's no true or significant outcome that will, really make a difference in the lives of the people who are out there protesting. So you have, unfortunately, often a high number of casualties and no real significant change to echo that.
Here's an interesting story as well, Lisa. The Catholic Church is debating whether or not married men should become priests. Let's chit-chat a bit about that.
This is a debate that's been going on for a very long time, and I know many people who are advocates or researchers, students of Catholicism who believe very strongly in this. Of course, it's against the tenet of the church to have a married man enter the church and serve God. But at the same time, when you have so many stories of these men, unfortunately, giving in to some of their urges in a way that is not normal, meaning with children or with other men, or doing things that are with underage boys, and that the headlines are all there. Unfortunately, we don't have to get into it, but should there be this reform or change within the Catholic Church, then you'd have men who openly want to be married, want to enjoy that part of life, but also want to serve God and be part of the church. And I think that who might have an opinion about it, but I think it's an interesting. Um, uh, it would be an interesting change. And perhaps that's what needs to be done in order not to have those headlines. When you have so much stringency, you're also going to have these behind the scenes stories, because we're all human after all.
Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks so much, Lisa.
My pleasure.